Good morning, and thank you so much for waking up with us here on Live Now from Fox. We made it to Friday, you all. It's August 15th. I'll be here for the next few hours to give you all of your breaking news alerts, top stories, and of course, your live events of the day. And it's no surprise we do begin this Friday morning with the very latest of the Trump presidency. Of course, all eyes are on the very latest of President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. We have them side by side on your screen. As the world's eyes are locked on Alaska, where Presidents Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin will meet face-to-face today, they are expected to discuss the war in Ukraine. President Trump is remaining positive heading into the summit, but as Fox's Rebecca Castor reports, he's also trying to manage everyone's expectations.
A glimmer of hope on the war front Thursday as Ukraine and Russia each release 84 prisoners of war. President Trump is hoping this won't be the only deal they make this week, but he's keeping his expectations in check ahead of his sit-down with Russia's Vladimir Putin.
Tomorrow, all I want to do is set the table for the next meeting. We're going to find out where everybody stands, and I'll know within the first 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes.
If things don't go well, Trump says Russia will face severe consequences. But when meeting with Russian officials today, Putin seemed optimistic.
The current American administration is making, in my opinion, quite energetic and sincere efforts to stop the hostilities, stop the crisis, and reach agreements that are of interest to all parties involved in this conflict in order to create long-term conditions of peace.
But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warns Putin can't be trusted. He will not be in Alaska Friday and will be waiting for a call from Trump to hear how things went.
I won't be shocked if we see some surprise tomorrow that he throws a wrinkle in, but I think President Trump's pretty straightforward on this. You need to end this. You need to get a ceasefire, wrap it up.
If Putin is serious about a ceasefire and ready to sit down with Zelensky, President Trump says he already has 3 locations in mind for the next meeting. At the White House, Rebecca Castor, Fox News.
Rebecca, thank you so much for that detailed report, and a lot to discuss this Friday. So we want to bring into the conversation none other than political analyst Rich Rubino. Happy Friday, Rich. Always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Happy Friday.
So, Rich, a lot of eyes on Alaska on this Friday, as we did mention. U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin expected to have those highly anticipated discussions as it relates to the war in Ukraine. Set this up for us. Explain why this is so important.
Yes, it's very important. And basically, this is going to be a bilateral meeting between Presidents Putin and President Trump. President Zelensky will not be there. This will not be a tripartite meeting. It will just be a bilateral meeting, if you will. And this is, at least if you listen to Donald Trump, this is where he's going to use it basically as a feeler to see whether or not President Putin wants peace and what the negotiating terms essentially are going to be in terms of with Vladimir Putin, kind of what he wants, and then he'll call up President Zelensky and inform him kind of how the meeting went. It's interesting, Vladimir Putin, basically, I think that he's made certain, he has certain things that he wants there to be concessions on the part of the Ukrainians in return for end of the war. He wants 5 regions that the Russia currently holds, like the Crimea, for example. He wants Ukraine to declare that they are part of Russia. He also wants Ukraine to be neutral, and he wants the Ukrainians to give up any sort of hopes that they will join NATO. And that's really, I think, kind of the defining issue of this whole thing, is that I think that Russia fears that NATO continues to increase and increase and increase. He wants to contain it, and he views Ukraine as basically as the first country that he will not accept. The Russians will say that this country will not be a part of NATO, and that's really what I think this is really kind of about.
Absolutely. And one thing we love about you, Rich, is you're able to provide that historical context. Let's look back to the campaign trail when President Donald Trump, at the time he was campaigning against Kamala Harris, but he said, hey, if I was the commander in chief, we wouldn't even be this far into the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Well, now it's hit ahead. We've seen Vladimir Putin come to the White House, and it seems like the conversations with President Trump and Vladimir Putin, those first discussions when he got back to the Oval Office, were much more positive compared to Ukrainian president's discussions. Volodymyr Zelensky, some people say those first discussions were a little tense. Let's talk about those relationships with the U.S. and Russia and the U.S. and Ukraine and what today symbolizes.
Yes, and so the Cold War, obviously, there were a lot of tension between the United States and Russia. The United States worked to form the Warsaw Pact, which was, rather NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was essentially a litany of countries that agreed that if they were that came together and agreed that if they were attacked by an external power, all those countries would come and they would protect that country. Russia started the Warsaw Pact. There were a lot of Russian satellites, a lot of Russian satellite countries. When the Soviet Union came to a screeching halt back in 1991 and the Cold War was over, there were some that believed that perhaps maybe the United States, if maybe that NATO should be disbanded because it no longer serves a purpose. There was some talk potentially, what if the United States were to continue NATO but invite Russia into NATO? They didn't do that, but essentially James Baker, the Secretary of State in the first George H. Bush, that is, administration in 1991, met with Gorbachev and supposedly made him a tacit promise that they would not continue to expand NATO eastward. Then a couple years later, Poland, Czech Republic, and Hungary won membership into NATO, and NATO has been expanding ever since then. And I think that's really effectuated enmity on the part of Russia. They view this as almost imperialism, if you will, that the United States is getting NATO is getting closer and closer to Russia. They can spy on Russia, for example. So that's really where this is coming from. And if you go back, certainly President Barack Obama had a very rivalrous tension relationship with Vladimir Putin. Before that, George W. Bush, back in 2001, when he first met with Vladimir Putin, he essentially said that he looked into Vladimir Putin's soul and thought he was a good man. Donald Trump, obviously, in 2018, he was at a press conference and they asked whether there was Russian interference, which some of the U.S. intelligence agency had indicated there was, and he says that he believes Vladimir Putin. So he had a very good relationship with Vladimir Putin in the first administration. Joe Biden's administration had a lot of tensions with Vladimir Putin, and after that one meeting and after Russia invaded Ukraine, Joe Biden basically said he would not meet with Vladimir Putin. And Donald Trump did open that door, has had at least phone calls with Vladimir Putin. He has not treated him like he's in exile. And we're seeing now what will be the first time since 2007 with George W. Bush that a U.S. president has had a summit with a Russian leader, met with a Russian leader on U.S. soil.
Rich, as we are further discussing these highly anticipated discussions later today, a lot of eyes are on Ukraine this Friday. Right now, giving you and the viewers a live look at Independence Square in Kyiv, Ukraine. A lot of eyes are on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, what his reaction could be to these talks in Alaska today. Of course, we've seen his remarks on X. Zelensky does not mince words. He says he does not feel like Russia is trying to end the war in any way. He says Russia cannot be trusted. And we've seen throughout the week, throughout the months, throughout the years, EU leaders rallying behind Zelensky. We just saw Zelensky out in the UK speaking with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and he put out on X, we stand with Ukraine. Let's talk about this EU response, what this means, standing and rallying behind Ukraine. Of course, we've heard of threats of trade and sanctions if Russia does not comply.
Yes, and Vladimir Putin, in many respects, is persona non grata in the European Union. The International Criminal Court has said in many countries, many European Union countries, that if he goes there, they will potentially try to arrest him. That's one of the reasons why it came down to basically either Hungary, where the president of Hungary is very much an ally of both men, or it was going to be in the United States, and they eventually chose Alaska, which was, of course, was once owned by Russia, and then William Sword, the Secretary of State in the Andrew Johnson administration back in 1867, purchased it for a very small amount. But I think that President Zelensky and Vladimir Putin, at least in terms of rhetoric right now, are really not close. They both basically have certain things that they want the other to concede that it looks like the other party will not concede. This is where Donald Trump, his mission, I guess, as a diplomat and using the good offices of the United States, is going to try to mediate something that will at least create for a ceasefire, and potentially a ceasefire, and then eventually some sort of a peace treaty between the two countries. But it's very much an arduous task.
Political analyst Rich Rubino, always a pleasure to have candid conversations here with you on Live Now from Fox. Before we let you go, are there any things we should be listening out for today? Obviously, with these high-level talks, many times cameras are not allowed inside, sometimes classified information being discussed. But afterwards, there might be some press conferences. Anything we should be listening out for to see how these talks went?
Well, it's just interesting because Donald Trump, unlike any other president, sometimes says what was said in private in public, and he sometimes can escalate the rhetoric, if you will. So it'll be very interesting to see if he does not get what what he thinks Vladimir Putin, if he does not believe that Vladimir Putin is wanting a peace deal, and he's not going to try to escalate his movement for peace. You could see something where Donald Trump actually excoriates him to his face. I don't think that's going to happen, but there's always that remote possibility.
All right, Rich Rubino, we'll be keeping a close eye to see how those high-level talks go today. And, of course, we'll be checking back in with you for post-analysis. Always a pleasure. I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great weekend.
Sounds great. You as well.
Thank you so much. And again, we are keeping a close eye, if you're just now tuning in, as today President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin are expected to meet in Alaska. We have some live looks that I want to share with you as we are discussing these high-level talks on today. This one takes us out to Russia, giving you a live look there here at 5:07. And we also have this live look, which takes us out to Kyiv, Ukraine, a live look at Independence Square. We'll be keeping a close eye on these talks. And of course, you can rely on Live Now from Fox for the most up-to-date and accurate information.